Okay, hello everybody. A little bit of a fun lore video that we have lined up today. We are going to be talking about the kind of the unlikely connection between the story of Bloodborne and a pair of fascinating, well, really a trio, but kind of a pair mainly, of fascinating 20th century figures, namely L. Ron Hubbard and a rocket scientist named Jack Parsons. The connection between these things is something called the Moon Child, and we'll get into more of what that means. But just to kind of set the stage here, the moon, when it comes to magic and rituals and alchemy, for a long time in the West has been associated with women, femininity, menstrual cycles, and childbirth. And that is a theme that you see repeated in Bloodborne, and really across a lot of Miyazaki's games. The moon is associated with women and femininity and childbirth. And in the story of Bloodborne particularly, childbirth is a huge, huge theme. There's this really interesting interview with director Hidetaka Miyazaki, where he talks about how he was designing and directing Bloodborne when his wife was pregnant with their first child. And so, sort of maybe unconsciously or consciously, a lot of his fears around things like childbirth and fatherhood made their way into the game. And it's very easy to see that, right? One of the central story themes kind of running through the game has to do with this right here, the School of Mensis, and these two quotes that we find. One of them is found in Yahar Ghul, the Unseen Village. It says, "Madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon." Now this is referring to the School of Mensis. And the next note that sort of illuminates this story thread for us is this. You find it in Byrgenwerth. And it says, "When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred. And when the great ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child." Now, the School of Mensis is attempting to bring the blood moon and sort of following that, the presence and influence of the Great Ones closer to humanity. There is something in place that is preventing that from happening in the game world, namely Rom, the spider, the sweet spider gal that you fight at the bottom of the lake that's just outside of Byrgenwerth. She is holding off, in a way, the influence of the Great Ones. And you can see examples of this in runes that say things like great bodies of water are kind of a bulwark against the influence of the Great Ones. But you sort of succeed where the School of Mensis has not yet accomplished their goals. When you kill Rom, the blood moon hangs low and a womb is blessed with child. Actually, multiple people in the game start to experience symptoms of pregnancy once you beat Rom, once you kill Rom. One of them is the false Yosefka. And if you kill her after that, you get a third of an umbilical cord, which gives you a little bit more lore about what exactly is happening here. But another character who starts to experience these symptoms of pregnancy after the blood moon is a woman named Ariana, and that is who we are mainly going to be talking about here. Ariana is... we'll say she's employed in the world's oldest profession. She's a lady of the night in Yharnam, and you first meet her kind of in some of these back alleys of Yharnam. You knock on her door. She says that she's off on hunting nights. She doesn't take any clients or customers on those nights. But once you return to her after doing some other stuff, you can tell her about the safe place in the Odin Chapel, and you can meet her there. She is dressed in the noble's dress that you can find in Canehurst Castle, and it's strongly implied that she is related some way to Queen Annalise, the last of the Vile Bloods. And the people in Odin Chapel, particularly there's a nun named Adela. they're suspicious of Ariana, probably because of her profession. They don't like having her around, but also maybe because they can sense that she has some sort of connection to the Vile Bloods. But anyways, when you recruit her to the Odin Chapel, you can talk with her, about who she is and what she's doing, and she will give you vials of her blood. These are healing items that you can use that are a little bit better than just the regular blood vials. But once the blood moon rises, she starts to complain of these pregnancy symptoms and says, I can't give you any more of my blood. And then after that, you can find her in an alleyway, and she has given birth to this wonderful miracle baby. Who could have guessed that such a great thing would happen on the night of the hunt? Just kidding, it's a nightmare. It is a complete monster. She says, oh my God, I can't believe it. This is a nightmare. This guy right here is what she gives birth to. And if you kill this little guy, you get a third of an umbilical cord, which shows you that this is a baby great one. That is what she was carrying and what she gave birth to. And the description here says, every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. And Odin, the formless great one, is no different. To think it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. So that line, corrupted blood, again kind of reinforces this idea that Ariana is part of the Vile Bloods. She's related to Cainhurst and Annalise in some way. So, Ariana is kind of a riff or an inversion on the Virgin Mary and some sort of miraculous conception. The story with Mary, as I'm sure everybody's familiar with, but I'll just say it again in case anybody doesn't know what Christianity is, or the lore of Christianity. Mary was a young Jewish girl who was visited by an angel, and that angel told her that she was going to become pregnant with the child of God. And this would happen miraculously while she was still a virgin. And the doctrine of the virgin birth is basically to kind of get around this idea that somebody born through regular methods would be carrying like this sin inside of them. They wouldn't be perfect. And so basically that's why we have this story, to show that this child of God that was not born through normal means, is not born of human action. It was born through this connection between a human and God. And this is not exactly consensual. Mary in the story, it says, we don't have any firsthand accounts from her, but the people who wrote the accounts of what happened later say that she was happy about this. She was glad to carry God's child. It was not something that upset her or frightened her. But at the end of the day, it's not like God asked permission, right? An angel showed up and said, you are pregnant, you are going to carry this child. And Mary didn't really have a choice in that. So Ariana is kind of an inversion or a riff on that. It's strongly implied that this cute little baby is Odin's child. The formless great one, Odin, is no different. It was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. Ariana does not consent to bearing this child, but it begins to grow inside of her anyways. And this is sort of the major theme that runs through Bloodborne, is that the Great Ones are not evil, they're not bad, but they're kind of inscrutable. It's in some ways impossible for humans to know what their motivations are and what they want. But we do know one thing about them, which is that they want to connect with humanity in some way so that they can reproduce. Because the Great Ones lose their child. They need human surrogates to carry these children. And there's a bunch of different examples of these human surrogates. Queen Yharnam is one of them. You see a vision of her after you kill Rom. There's blood on her midsection on this white dress that strongly implies some sort of disaster or emergency, some sort of tragedy that happened with her childbirth. It does not seem like it went well. So Bloodborne, in one sense, is all about these moon children, right? The presence of the moon somehow creates and conceives children who are the children of the Great Ones. And one of the characters that is used to conceive this child, Ariana uses the word whore to describe herself. And people nowadays think that's not a very nice word, right? But it's a word that will become very important for this next section that we are going to talk about, because the character of Ariana, the presence of the moon, and this birth of a divine child is what connects Bloodborne to L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology and rocket science and 19th and 20th century occult ceremonial magic. So let's switch gears here and let's talk about our cast of characters that we have with us. First off, L. Ron Hubbard is an American science fiction author, the founder of Dianetics and later Scientology. And I'll give you a little brief overview of what those are. Essentially, Dianetics began as an alternative to psychology and psychiatry. It was a type of self-help. And in the early to mid 20th century in America, self-help ideas and books like this were incredibly popular. It was a way for a person to gain influence and a career and money if they were writing these sort of self-help books. And a lot of this has to do with the end of World War II. Specifically, men coming back from war with very complex PTSD, looking for ways to alleviate their suffering, whether it was in religion or in some type of new psychology or new practice, because this is also when we see the rise of pharmaceutical drugs for things like anxiety and depression, as well as a more widespread practice of psychology. So Dianetics was Hubbard stepping into that arena and basically saying, hey, I have an alternative for you. I have this thing that can help you. And another big part of this was women who had previously been in the workforce going back to domestic life. Because during the war, all the men get sent off to shoot each other, right? That's what men are supposed to do during war. But we still need people to make the bullets and the tanks and the planes, and who's going to make them if all the men are gone? There was an incredible boom in women in the workforce during the wartime period, and then that started to scale down in the post-war period. And a lot of women went from having these jobs and careers in industry and manufacturing back to being homemakers and wives and mothers. And there were a lot of them for whom that was a very difficult transition. As you can imagine, right? I mean, it's the 1950s. There are all these very sexist and misogynistic expectations on women, and it seemed like for a brief moment there was a little bit more agency. Women were making their own money, running their own workplaces, and then it kind of starts to scale back after that. So the story of drugs and psychiatry in the 20th century is a very, very long one, but basically all you need to know about Dianetics was that it was L. Ron Hubbard kind of saying, here's an alternative to mainstream psychology and psychiatry. And it was influenced by things like New Age philosophy, which is another current of thought that is running through the mid-20th century, and importantly, very importantly, Western esoteric magic. So things like Thelema, which we are going to talk about in a minute, things like the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was the temple of Thelema. L. Ron Hubbard was very intimately connected with these ideas of occult ritual magic, of black magic, of chaos magic, and really the goal of all of this with magic or with Scientology or with psychiatry, it's people trying to remove these barriers and help humanity achieve their full potential, either an individual person or a whole population of people. And so, I mean, in things like Dianetics and Scientology, you can see a little bit of like the healing church, right? These are people using a new technology. I mean, in Bloodborne, it's the blood of the old ones. In real life, it's things like pharmaceutical drugs and psychology to try and elevate humanity to the next level. That is what Thelema is about. That is what Scientology is about. And Scientology was this religion that grew out of Dianetics. But L. Ron Hubbard was mainly known originally as a science fiction author. And he was a famous flim-flam man, a famous con artist. He was all about the money. There's a very famous quote from him where he says, if you wanted to make a bunch of money, your best bet would be to start a religion. That was his primary motivator. I think in the end, he started to kind of believe his own bullshit, which also, ironically, is kind of the mark of someone who understands what magic and what Thelema is about. It's kind of just about believing in yourself. And I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here, but basically, he was a flim-flam guy. He started Dianetics and Scientology, died in 1986. Our next character here for this story is another just incredibly fascinating character in American 20th century history, a guy named Jack Parsons. He was born in 1914. He was an American rocket scientist, part of the group that founded the Jet Propulsion Lab that still exists to this day in California. He was very, very interested in black magic, in left-hand path magic, I think is what a lot of people would call it. There's right-hand path, there's left-hand path, there's chaos magic. If I tried to get into all of the distinctions between them, this would be a 7-hour video. But for the purposes of this video, he was a person who was interested in using ritual and ceremonial magic, specifically in Thelema. And he died getting blown up by one of its inventions, like a Looney Tunes character. He dropped this bottle of like nitroglycerin, I think, and he blew himself to smithereens in 1952. Kind of tragic, but also, a fitting end for an early rocket scientist. But his influence lives on in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. These are the people who did the Voyager missions in the 1970s and 80s, the spacecraft that are still out there and that have officially flown into interstellar space now. They are beyond our solar system, beyond our sun's gravity. It's the farthest any sort of human-made machine has ever gone from Earth. They are the people responsible for the Mars rovers. They're the ones who are doing those missions. Really just deep space, unmanned exploration, and experimental craft like the Voyager missions. That's what they were doing. And in the 1940s, especially, Jack Parsons was on the cutting edge of rocket technology, figuring out how can we create things that will escape Earth's gravity. So that's who Jack is. And the person who sort of ties Jack and L. Ron Hubbard together is a man named Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, born in 1875, lived until 1947. He was an English occultist and magician. He was the founder of Thelema. And he was a big nerd, but also, in his own way, he was a prophet. He thought of himself as a prophet, as a person who was trying to guide humanity through a particularly troubling and violent period of human history, which is the late 19th and early to mid 20th century. I mean, the 20th century, by some accounts, is the bloodiest century in human history. We had 2 world wars in that span of time. And we had the introduction of all this new technology, all these new ways of thinking, social configurations, roles of men and women are changing. Religion is kind of waning as an influence on people's lives. The world is becoming more and more secularized. And Aleister Crowley styled himself as the Great Beast 666. He was like, I'm the bad guy. If you are a religious person, I am the person who is trying to wipe away the influence of religion on the world and introduce humanity into a new age. He called it the Age of Horus. So let's talk a little bit about what Thelema is and what some of its ideology is. So I think the best way to describe Thelema is not as a religion. Some historians and sociologists would call it like a new religious movement, quote unquote. That's basically the title that they give to any kind of religion or spirituality or spiritual philosophy that arises in the last half of the 19th century through the 20th and into the 21st century. So things like neo-paganism, right? People worshiping Thor and Odin and stuff like that. You see that sometimes on the internet. Sociologists would call that a new religious movement. It's kind of a revival of something old, but it's also very new. Things like the Church of Satan would be a new religious movement, even though a lot of Satanists would say, we're not religious, we're atheists, the Satan thing, we don't actually believe he's real. That's just kind of the historical term that people use. But I think it's more accurate to call Thelema an occult spiritual philosophy. It is concerned with humans finding their true will. Maybe you've heard this quote before. It comes from The Book of the Law, written by Aleister Crowley. He said, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." So as opposed to older religions, which had these long lists of rules and laws concerned with ritual purity and impurity, confession and sin, things like that, Crowley basically said, look, the only thing that Thelema is concerned with is your true will, and a human living in accordance with their true will. And the idea of true will is complicated. It's not just whatever you want to do in the moment is your true will. It's kind of like your purpose as a human. And you discover this purpose by using ceremonial magic. And when I say the word magic, I'm not talking about like cast fireball or, something like that. We're not talking about glintstone sorcery here. Basically, ceremonial magic are these rituals that people use in order to change their perceptions about the world and themselves and the people around them. So whatever it is, right? There was this thing in Thelema called the Gnostic Mass, which was basically a parody of a Catholic Mass. So they're going through some of the motions. There's like... they're eating and drinking things, but it's not, the sanctified host of the Catholic Mass. They're chanting things, they're reading from this book. The goal of that is to bring you knowledge, potentially from some sort of higher spiritual being or something from another plane, to help you understand what your true will is. And Thelema was also very interested in these ages of humanity. Humanity is progressing through different ages that sometimes overlap with each other, but Crowley saw the age of Horus as our present age. It was an age associated with sunlight and knowledge. It was associated with man taking mastery over his own fate and worshiping life instead of worshiping death. He saw all the old religions, particularly Christianity, as obsessed with death worship and pain and suffering and denying yourself and submitting your will to something higher than yourself. So I am not going to live for myself, I'm going to live for God. I'm going to submit my will and desires to God instead of doing what I will. And Crowley kind of rightly saw that age was coming to an end by the beginning of the 20th century. Religion as a social cohesive force that directed people's choices and their lives was not as important as it had been previously, for a lot of different reasons. Technological and scientific advances, sort of the industrialization and proletarianization of the world, ripping people away from their connection to land and their neighbors to bring them into cities where they were alienated from the products of their labors. This is all basic kind of like what Nietzsche said. Nietzsche said, God is dead. And he wasn't happy about that, I don't think. I haven't read a ton of Nietzsche, so I don't know exactly what he thought. But his idea was essentially that, like, it's very, very hard and maybe impossible to be a religious person nowadays in the same way that people used to be. And Crowley took that one step further and said, actually, that old system was bad. I am the enemy of that old system. I will become the great beast who abolishes religion and Christianity and who ushers in this new age of human will and people acting through their own will instead of submitting their will to something else divine. So that's Thelema in a nutshell. I may have gotten some stuff wrong. I don't know. If there are any Thelemites watching, please message me and tell me if I got anything wrong, because I think this stuff is really interesting from a historical and from a sociological perspective. So educate me if I got anything wrong and if you have the time to reach out. So how do you usher in this age of Horus, and how do you defeat the influence of, authoritative religion that has ruled over humanity since time immemorial? Crowley thought that there were a pair of characters that would be very, very important in ushering in this new age. Those would be the Scarlet Woman and the Moon Child. So the Scarlet Woman is essentially this character from the book of Revelation, which is the final book of the Christian New Testament. And the Scarlet Woman is also sometimes called the Whore of Babylon. Maybe you have heard that term before. This is our connection to Ariana. This is a character who would conceive a child with another character in Revelation called the Great Beast, and their offspring would be the Antichrist. Now, to Christians reading this in like the 1st or 2nd century AD, they would have seen the Antichrist as an enemy, as this sort of imperial conqueror. It would have brought to mind thoughts of a Roman emperor, because they were living under the influence of the Roman Empire at the time. And the book of Revelation is, that some scholars say, that it is sort of a veiled critique of empire, or maybe not veiled, but it's a poetic, apocalyptic, prophetic critique of empire, and setting up Christianity as the thing that will conquer this sort of violent imperialism that they were living under at the time. But to Crowley, he liked the Antichrist. That was his dude, right? This is the guy who's going to, ironically, conquer the authoritative and what he saw as oppressive influence of religion over people's lives and their will and their choices. So Crowley was very interested in finding this Scarlet Woman, in finding the Antichrist. He believed himself to be that great beast. So he thought this is an office that a woman can fulfill in this grand scheme of Thelema that we have going on here. There's a quote that we have from here. He said that the great idea of magicians of all times was to bring into being an Antichrist, a living being in form, resembling man and possessing those qualities of man which distinguish him from beasts, namely intellect and power of speech, but neither begotten in the manner of human generation nor inhabited by a human soul. So again, we see this idea of an immaculate conception, something that is not brought about by the normal methods that people use to conceive a child. This child was going to be the embodiment of the age of Horus, and so summoning the Scarlet Woman and conceiving the Moon Child were maybe the two greatest goals of Thelema. And to this end, Crowley had a bunch of different magical rituals and things that a person could do to bring about this sort of reality. So, what is the connection then between L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons and this Moon Child? Well, let's get into it. This is the story of a very interesting interaction between these two 20th century American historical figures that takes place over the course of about a year. So L. Ron Hubbard was in the Navy during World War II, and he basically just farted around on a submarine the whole time and shot missiles at Mexico. He was off the coast of California. He didn't do anything. He made up a bunch of injuries so that he could get pension and early discharge and stuff, because he was a flim-flam guy. He was trying to scam his way out of things. He didn't want to work. He just wanted to make money. So in 1945, he is on leave from the Navy, and he lands ashore in California, and he goes to move in with Jack Parsons because he has heard about this house that Parsons has where people are taking magic seriously. Parsons at that time was a member of the OTO. He was in contact with Aleister Crowley. He was one of Crowley's sort of favorite initiates. They had a correspondence with each other. Jack Parsons called Crowley my father. I think Crowley called him my son. So they did have a very close relationship. In some ways, I think Crowley maybe saw Parsons as, if not a successor, then someone who at least was taking this very seriously and was good at what they were doing. He was good at magic. And he had this house full of people in Pasadena, in California, who were all doing magic with him. Specifically, a lot of young women who he was recruiting from the university to come live with him. And as soon as L. Ron Hubbard moved in with Jack Parsons, Jack recognized him as a man with great magical potential. And there was a quote here that he said. Jack Parsons was writing to somebody else about L. Ron Hubbard. He said, "He is the most Thelemic person I have ever met and is in complete accord with our own principles." And a lot of that has to do with these, just the way that L. Ron Hubbard could get what he wanted and sort of bend reality around him. There are all these great stories from people who were living in the house at the time. Specifically, L. Ron Hubbard's roommate at the time was a guy who kind of saw through the bullshit a little bit and would call L. Ron Hubbard on stuff. L. Ron Hubbard was a famous compulsive liar. And that's part of the tough thing about studying his life is it's very hard to separate what he's writing. Is it fact or fiction, right? Most of what he told people about his life was a lie. But he was incredibly charismatic. He could get people to love him and follow him and obey him very easily. And so that is what Parsons saw as that magical potential. He can bend people towards his will. He can enact his will and do what he wants and get what he wants very easily. So Parsons starts initiating him into these OTO secret rituals. And a lot of what LRH learns in this period makes its way into Dianetics and makes its way into Scientology. There are major connections between Thelema and the Ordo Templi Orientis and these sorts of magical workings and rituals, compared to what you will find later in L. Ron Hubbard's writing. So he's paying attention during this time. I don't know if he bought it, but I think he saw it as something he could use to move himself up in the world and to get people to follow him. So if L. Ron Hubbard didn't believe necessarily that Thelema was true or that this magic did anything, he at least saw that he could use it to control and influence people. And so to that end, he was very interested in it. Almost immediately, as soon as L. Ron Hubbard moves in, he starts dating Jack Parsons' girlfriend, Betty. And this was supposed to be fine. It was supposed to be cool. Everybody in the house, well, I don't know if everybody, but Jack Parsons specifically was polyamorous. He had an open relationship with his girlfriend, Betty. And he told people at the time, like, jealousy is like a peasant emotion. It's below me, as this grand magician, as this, high-ranking member of the OTO. I don't get jealous. I'm not possessive. Betty can do whatever she wants. But he secretly was insanely jealous of L. Ron Hubbard because Betty started ignoring him and just going out with LRH. And there's some quotes from people who lived in the house at the time of like they walked in on Jack Parsons one morning doing a magic ritual to try and like sick a demon on L. Ron Hubbard to like kill him so that he would stop making out with his girlfriend in front of everybody. So he was struggling a lot with this. And I think a lot of it is because he saw L. Ron Hubbard as a competitor. Jack was the big man on campus. He was the guy running this house. And then L. Ron Hubbard, this weird ginger Navy guy with a head full of bad teeth who can't stop lying about his own life, all of a sudden everybody is just magnetically attracted to this man. So that was tough for him, but because he recognized L. Ron Hubbard as such a what he thought of as a magical, powerful figure, he wanted to partner with him and use that power. And specifically what Jack wanted to do was to create a moonchild by summoning the Scarlet Woman and getting her pregnant. And this whole series of rituals is what's referred to as the Babylon working. Babylon is the name of the goddess. She's the Scarlet Woman in this, OTO Thelema mythology. And Jack wanted to push the boundaries of magic, of left-hand path magic, and he wanted to do like the ritual, like the most challenging, the most serious thing that he could do. So him and L. Ron Hubbard started work on this on January 4th, 1946, a little less than a year after L. Ron Hubbard moves in with him. The way they do that is through a series of incredibly elaborate rituals with names like Invocation of the Bornless One and Invoking Pentagram of Air. And doesn't that just sound like something straight out of Bloodborne, right? And really all of this is just, it's a lot of waving around daggers and knives. It's a lot of waving around wands, and it's a lot of jerking off. Like 90% of these rituals is just Jack Parsons jerking off in different places onto different things. And I'm not going to go through all of the ways that he did that, but he did keep an incredibly detailed account of everything that he did to try and summon and manifest the Scarlet Woman. He wrote it down. It's called the Book of Babylon. So you can find it on the internet. I think it's just free. So if you want to try the Babylon working, there are instructions on how to do that. And I encourage you to try it, because what's the worst thing that could happen? Anybody interested in magic right now is probably screaming at their computer, "Don't do it. Please do not do it. It's dangerous." I don't know if it's dangerous or not. That's up to you to decide if it is your true will to try and, and do this too. But anyways, it takes months and months of these insanely elaborate rituals, and tons of weird shit happens while they're doing this. L. Ron Hubbard is the scribe for all of this. So he is writing down what is happening. They have poltergeists, there's orbs, there's wailing banshees stalking the grounds outside the house. Some legitimately weird stuff happens while they're doing this, and whether or not those are coincidences or evidence that it's working or evidence that it's not working is up to you to decide for yourself. But Parsons was communicating with Aleister Crowley throughout this whole time, and he was letting Crowley know what he was doing. And Crowley thought this was the stupidest thing anybody could try to do, because he liked Parsons, but he did not think that Parsons was at the level where he should be attempting a ritual this complex and this serious. And in communications with other people, Crowley basically said, these guys are idiots. They're going to get themselves killed. They are going to cause some sort of disaster. No one should be attempting this right now. Maybe Crowley himself could give it a try, but he was very skeptical that they were going to be able to succeed. But Parsons, eager to prove himself, and perhaps driven too by this jealousy of L. Ron Hubbard, and he wanted to show that he was still the top dog. He was still the top magician in this house. They go through with it. They complete the ritual in 1946. So it takes like a year for them to do all of these rituals. L. Ron Hubbard is kind of in and out of the house at different times. And eventually, a woman shows up to the house named Marjorie Cameron. This picture here is actually a painting that Marjorie Cameron did of Jack Parsons as the Angel of Death. So she was an artist. She was kind of a young, not like a hippie necessarily, because this was before hippies, but she's like the thing that came before hippies. She was like a California crystal gal, palm reading, tarot cards, magic. She was into all of it. She shows up, and they identify her as the Scarlet Woman. And to her credit, she plays along, right? She's like, absolutely, I'll get involved in this. I'll do all these rituals with you. Jack Parsons never ends up getting Marjorie Cameron pregnant, which was the goal of the whole ritual, was to summon the Scarlet Woman. She becomes pregnant, and then she has the Moon Child. That never happened. So it kind of fizzles out a little bit. But like I said, in 1952, Jack Parsons tragically dies. He is working on something in his house. It's a rocketry project for the JPL. He's married to Marjorie Cameron at this point. And he drops this vial of nitroglycerin. It explodes. He is dismembered. One of his arms is blown off, and he bleeds to death in his own house. And there are some people who say that his death and the Babylon working are connected, that he messed up the ritual in some way, that he invited the attention of powers beyond his control, and there were unforeseen consequences for his actions. And other people say it was just an accident. I mean, this guy was working with explosives in his own house. It's kind of like eventually something like that is bound to happen. So that is the Babylon working, and Bloodborne's connection to these three, I find them to be fascinating characters in 20th century history. Aleister Crowley, kind of the prophet, the bad guy of the age. Jack Parsons, this brilliant rocket scientist, sort of gone before his time, but whose influence still lingers with us today. And L. Ron Hubbard, a man who was incredibly talented at getting what he wanted, to the point where he created an institution that eventually outgrew him and has transformed into something that is a major force in the world today. And we are still dealing with the fallout of Scientology and Dianetics and Hubbard to this very day. So, were they magicians? Were they wizards? I don't know. I don't know if any of this stuff has any effect in the real world, but magic, especially ritual magic like this, seems to intersect with the story of the 20th century in very interesting ways. And all of these power players and major historical figures that we see, a lot of them have some connection to ritual magic, whether they were doing it themselves, whether they were aware of it or not, or doing it kind of unconsciously. It's sort of an understudied and underappreciated part of our recent modern world history. So there you go. That's the connection. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. I do lore stuff, I do PvP stuff, random videos mainly focused on From Software games, history, religion, philosophy, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching.